Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I'm honored and humbled to be in the presence of New York Times bestselling author and all-around trailblazer, Caroline Leavitt. If you're on social media, you probably recognize her as one of the faces behind A Mighty Blaze, an online haven for authors with the mission of helping writers pub in the time of Corona, helping readers find new books. But A Mighty Blaze really started with Caroline's Nothing is Cancelled virtual book tour, when she offered an open invitation to those affected by the pandemic. Caroline has been a fixture in the publishing industry for decades, having now written 12 critically acclaimed novels, in addition to numerous short stories and nonfiction pieces. Still, it wasn't until her ninth novel, Pictures of You, now available in a 10th anniversary edition, was picked up by Algonquin Books that she first hit the New York Times bestseller list, which just goes to show that writing really is a long game. Caroline is also a book reviewer and screenwriter and teaches novel writing online at both Stanford and UCLA Extension Writers Program, as well as working privately with writers. In all her spare time. Her new novel, With or Without You, was published in early August and tells the story of longtime lovers Stella and Simon, a nurse and aging rocker respectively, whose lives are forever changed when Stella suffers an unexpected medical crisis and comes out of it a markedly different person. Kirkus awarded With or Without You a starred review, noting, "What if Snow White woke up and decided she didn't much like Prince Charming? One character's coma is only the first surprise in this satisfying story of middle-aged love." And while readers will indeed be surprised and satisfied by the book's nuanced narrative, it's the author herself who got the biggest shock. The healing that came with fictionalizing her own harrowing ordeal of having survived a coma, albeit with no memory of the actual event. But that's Caroline Leavitt's story, and she's here to tell it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Central Booking. I am very happy to be in the virtual presence of Caroline Leavitt today, whose new book is With or Without You. And you, my friend, are a mighty blaze in the industry. So I am truly honored and delighted to have you on the show today. Thank you for being here.
I'm thrilled to be here. I'm completely honored. Thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. And so I mentioned this new great and wonderful book, With or Without You. And I thought we could start by talking about that a bit and giving people a taste for the book without necessarily spoiling it.
Okay.
The nice thing is a lot of these interviews that I do tend to be mysteries, thrillers, and you can really, really spoil those books. This maybe
Oh,
not.
right. You can get people mad at you.
Right? So anyway, I wanted to ask you first. So the book sort of starts with a medical crisis that really changes everything. But before we specifically talk about that, can you tell us about your two characters? We have, Simon and Stella, and they're already sort of at a crossroads in their life right before this crisis happens. One is a musician sort of looking to kindle his fame, and then another has made the decision that she's going to be a nurse. She's not going to follow him on the road. So can you just give us a bit of an evolution of the relationship?
Yeah, I really was interested in writing about people in midlife, and especially in their 40s, because that's when a lot of things become well, a lot of people think it becomes too late, even though that's not necessarily true. But for somebody who was a rock star, that's starting to be too late. You're not 20 years old anymore. And I was interested in how Simon was going to deal with that when, like, what happens when you've had all this fame and all these, groupies and people throwing themselves at you, and all of a sudden you're accused of making dad music instead of young music. Like, that's terrible. What do you do? And then I was thinking in terms of Stella, who, yes, she's a nurse and she's been on the road with Simon, and now she's thinking, what about my life? I want to be a nurse, and I'm in my 40s and I want to have a kid before it's too late. And how are we going to settle this? And meanwhile, the weather outside is getting all crazy and stormy, and so he has this one last chance. And I found that really interesting. And I wanted them both to change in real and dramatic ways, where everything they thought they knew was suddenly different. Because a lot of times that happens. And, the big joke about midlife crisis is that, you always think, oh, somebody goes off and they get a partner who's 18, or they buy a new car or whatever. And I wanted to look at it in a deeper way with, like, well, how can you be totally drastically different without, having to revert to trying to recapture your youth, when you were 18 or whatever it was. And I was just really interested in how they were going to change.
Right, right. And so, there's this fateful evening and they decide to maybe capture, some of the magic
Yep.
from their younger years. And so, of course, there's some drinking and there's a little bit of drugging. And then, Stella falls into a coma.
Hmm.
And again, things change very dramatically. And so actually what you said is a nice segue to the topic, but I wanted to ask you first about Simon, because as we initially know him, he sort of seems to be this, stereotypical sort of immature Asian
Yeah.
rocker, and he fundamentally changes.
Right.
So can you tell us about his progression? And then after that, maybe we can talk about Stella's.
Right. He does. And when I initially wrote him, a lot of my readers said, "Oh, he's such a jerk." And I kept saying, "Wait, you don't know him. Wait until you see the layers." And I started thinking, very deeply about fame. Well, what does fame mean to Simon, and where did that need come from? And without giving too much away, I started to think about and write about his backstory, how he grew up. And for Simon, fame was not the crowds and the girls and everything else that he thought it was. He begins to realize that it was his way of being seen and known by his parents, particularly his father. And he tells us a lot of things that happened when he was growing up, which to me made him deeply sympathetic. And I really felt for him. And I felt his yearning to just be seen, to just have someone look at you and say, yes, you are a good person, or you do have talent, and that, and just, that from one person. And it took me a bit of doing to get him from that stage where he's, putting mascara on his gray hair and going to the gym and trying to dress like Mick Jagger, to his realization that, what, I'm getting older and this may not happen for me. And what am I going to do to, it's like first you approach the loss with shock, thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to have this. I'm not going to be the rock star. And then it gets replaced by something that I thought was kind of magical, and important. And once he realizes that, it was really fun to write how he turns up at the end, because he totally changes. And he goes from being a guy that you would look at and you might say, what a jerk, to somebody you look at and you think, that's somebody I really want to know, that I could sit down and talk to and be friends with. And it's a dramatic shift. And I really liked the way it came out, even though it was really, really hard to do. It was really, really hard to convince people to just hang on and see where he goes. And you'll be surprised. Because there's this whole idea that, every character has to be likable. And I don't think that's true. I think they have to be understandable.
Yeah.
You have to sort of find the thing that you sympathize with and you understand. And who hasn't felt, I just want you to see me. I want you to know who I am. And so we can really have a connection and a bond. Everybody feels that.
Right. And I have to say, I think you achieved that balance because, initially I just wanted to shake him. But yeah, then
Everybody
you
did.
realize that, he's really a pretty likable person who does unlikable things at times,
Right,
but don't we all?
right,
But
right,
yeah, I mean,
right.
he turned out to be a really, really terrific character. And, Stella, on the other hand, I guess the irony here, and hopefully I'm using irony correctly and not like the Alanis sense of the word where people say that wasn't ironic at all. You just don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, you know, do you not know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, she was very, Stella was very, very much, everything was ordered. She was a nurse. She was really good at it. She asked a lot of questions. She wanted a really stable, middle of the road life. And when she came out of coma, she was a totally different person, and she got something very, very different. And she had her own journey to, get to a different place at the end, where she realized, well, here's what's important to me, and it's nothing like what I thought was going to be important to me. And she sort of opens up, and I liked that a lot, and it was really fun to write her, and to write her opening up.
No, it was terrific, and it was so funny because she wakes up and Simon is finally sort of the man that she always wanted him to be, except she still
Right. Except
doesn't
she doesn't.
appreciate it. It's like, oh,
She doesn't know him anymore. I know. And that happens in coma a lot. People just change, and all of a sudden you realize this isn't what I want. And then you have that big space of like, well, if I don't want this, what do I want?
right.
And how do I get there? And that's the tough part.
Right, right. And I did want to ask you, about coma too, because you experienced that yourself, and your experience was sort of the complete opposite.
It was the opposite. It was because I'm still sort of mad at this, but the hospital gave me something. I didn't know there was such a thing, but apparently there are pills that are memory blockers. They wipe your memory clean. And they do that so you'll be more docile when they're doing procedures if they have to repeat them. And also you're just easier to manage. And also because they don't know what goes on in coma, so you might as well not remember it. So when I woke up, my brain was sort of wiped clean and I had no idea what had happened to me or what it had been like or where I was in those, 3 weeks. But my body remembered, and I had these really traumatic things where I would smell something and I would go into a panic attack, and it would turn out it would be some lotion that they used on my
Right.
arms, or I would see a color like a stripe and I would start freaking out. And it was because it was the curtain in the hospital. So when I got out of the hospital, I was out of the hospital in 3 months, and I had to stay home, and I was sick for until the end of the year. And when I was able to go out, I went to a therapist because I couldn't sleep and I was having all these post-traumatic things happening, and the therapist said, well, why don't you write about it, and maybe that'll help you. So I wrote my first coma book, which was coming back to me, which was a person just like me, and it was sort of dark, serious book, and it did okay, but it didn't help me at all because I felt like, well, I'm still the same person, what good is this? So I put it aside, and I just kept living my life and living my life. And then it sort of dawned on me about 5 years ago that I couldn't take any of the post-traumatic stuff anymore. So I went to a different therapist and I told her what I had done. And she said, well, your mistake was you were writing what happened. You need to write what didn't happen. And she said, the brain won't know the difference. Just write someone completely different. So I thought, okay, I'll write somebody who does remember what went on. And as soon as I started to write it, I felt lighter. I mean, I know it's a weird thing to say that you feel lighter writing about a coma, but I felt better. And through Stella, I felt like I was re-experiencing my coma in a way that felt like true. It felt real to me. It felt true. And I started to feel better. And the more I wrote, the lighter, the more I was filled with a sense of, instead of this sense of dread, like, oh my God, I was in a coma, I started to feel this sense of wonder, like, oh, wow, this is really interesting and fascinating, and it's really fun to write. And I keep telling people, I know it sounds weird, but I'm really grateful that I went through that coma, because now I look at the world with much more wonder, because there's all kinds of weird things that can happen. And I feel better. I don't have, most of the post-traumatic stuff are gone. The only thing that's lasted is I'm not a big fan of going to sleep because it's a little bit too much, like, you don't know what's going to happen. But since I know what it is, I can sort of handle it. And the only thing really that I'm really mad about is I kept thinking, well, what if I had a near-death experience when I was in coma and I don't remember it? And I didn't luck out on that. But it actually was a completely terrible experience at the time, but now I look at it with wonder, and to me, that's amazing. That's just amazing.
Right. And I think that, that translates to the book because it starts and things seem to be very, very dark. And the more you go, there's a lightness, there's a hope. As you said, there's sort of a
Yeah,
wonder.
yeah, yeah. And that's what I want. That's what I wanted. And as I was writing it, I thought, wow, this is the happiest of all the books I've ever written. And I got to give these characters and myself this sense of, like, you don't know, like any minute something can happen, and it can be something that's full of miracles. And that's a wonderful way to live your life. At least I think it is. I think
Oh,
it
I
is.
totally agree. And, I have to ask you if you can tell us a little bit about Libby. I'm kind of hard
Right.
pressed to pick a favorite character, but I have to say, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, pick the person that you want to spend a little bit more time with, I loved her. I mean, she had a
I
very
love Libby. I love Libby.
complicated
Loved her,
relationship with
loved her, loved her.
Simon.
I had to have a best friend for Stella, and she had to be different than Stella. And she had to sort of complement what Stella was going through. And I thought, well, I want her to be a doctor because I know some female doctors and they're always sort of fighting to be understood or heard. And I wanted her to have some issues that she had to solve for this. And I thought, well, what would be her issues? And I thought, well, maybe I wanted her to have bad boyfriends. She chooses really poorly all the time. And she doesn't like Simon at first because she thinks he's really bad for her best friend and Stella deserves so much better. And then I kept thinking, well, what happened to her? And again, it always comes back to like what happened to you in the past. And I started thinking about what if, I don't want to give anything away, but what if like something happened in her childhood that made her feel responsible for something she really hadn't done? And the way she was atoning for it was to try to live a different life than she might have lived. I was sort of skirting around the subject. And to me, she became really sympathetic because she sort of understood that. And she goes to this psychiatrist who I also really loved, named Dr. Sheep. And he tells her, maybe you have to go back and look at what happened, and maybe you have a misconception about it. And she's willing to do that. And she does, once she does that, she changes. And she's also willing, she makes some really bad decisions. And again, you might hate her for the decision that she makes, which I can't give away. But in the end, she comes to understand that she did it out of love and fear. And lots of people make bad decisions out of love and fear. And to me, when I realized, oh, that's why she did that. And it took me a really long time to figure out, why is she doing this? Why is she doing this? But once I realized it was because she did it out of what she did out of love, and she became very sympathetic to me, and I wanted her to be better, and she became a better person at the end. Even in the way she was a doctor, she became different,
Right.
and like more open and more compassionate. And I felt like, good for you, Libby. Like, good for you. I'm really happy that you did that. And she was, I don't know, I've just never had like such a love for my characters, that they could do such wrong things and yet come out so right.
Right. And it's so
Yeah.
funny. I have to say, uh, sometimes when people are critiquing a book, they'll say, oh, the characters felt so real. And it's like, okay, what does that, what does that mean? What does that tell us?
Right.
And
What
then
does
I
that
read the
mean?
book and I'm like, yep. Like, okay.
Yeah, it's like people do bad things, and they do the wrong things for the right reasons and the right things for the wrong reasons. And what's important is like how that changes you when you realize, oh, I did that. Why did I do that? I shouldn't have done that. Now everything's screwed. And how am I going to fix this? And then you try to figure it out. And that's what life is. And to me, that was just amazing. Just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved that, a lot of times in a story, maybe one character has an epiphany or an enlightenment, but in this book, everybody does. And it all gels together in some kind of cohesive thing.
Yeah.
But I felt like
It
everybody was so fully formed.
Thank you. I wanted them to be, and I think that that's what happens as you get older. You start to think about different things, and everything has really serious repercussions about what you're going to do. And it's like throwing, a stone in the pond. It ripples out and it impacts all the people around you. And I liked that they were all connected in that way.
Yeah, and it was funny because, usually in a book, if it alternates characters, there's usually someone where I'm like, okay, when I get to that chapter, I can take a little break, go to bed, you know.
Oh
I'm
no.
like, darn you, Caroline, I can't. I like all of these characters. I never want to put the book down.
That's so funny to hear. I mean, I really liked them, but it took a long time to figure out. Once they did something bad, it was like weeks of figuring out how am I going to do this? I mean, this has to happen, but how
Right.
and why? And I got to the point where I just knew the characters so well, I could figure it out. And I
Sure.
knew what they had to go through and what I had to put them through, which
Sure.
was sometimes hard, but
And I want to ask you one more question about the book specifically, if you don't mind, and then maybe we can
no,
move on to other
absolutely,
topics.
absolutely.
But one of the interesting, things I found was we talked about, Simon being a musician, and he has this craving for fame. And then when Stella wakes up, she's changed, and all of a sudden she realizes that she really can't be a nurse anymore and doesn't even want to be. But she herself, has a new artistic talent, and she's really compelled to follow that through. So can you talk about the importance of sort of artistic expression and self-expression throughout the story, and how Stella and Simon sort of get different things from that, but ultimately the same thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really great question. I mean, it's sort of creativity means different things to different people. And for Simon, creativity started out with what he could get back from it, which was fame and money and glory. And for Stella, when she first has this talent, it takes her by surprise. And she's not sure what it means. And it means something very different for her than just being able to paint well, because it connects her to people in a way she could never imagine. And it gives people so much that even if she wanted to back away from it, which she does want to because she ends up getting the fame that Simon wants, she can't. She can't. So it becomes a choice. And it's something that she feels compelled to do. And for her, it just so happens that what she feels compelled to do helps a whole lot of people. And for Simon, his whole thing was he wants adulation, and he's jealous, that Stella has this fame and why doesn't she want it, and he wants it and what's he going to do about it. And it's not until he loses everything, in his personal life and his professional life and with his parents, that he comes to the realization of what's important for him, which a lot of it has to do with the initial impetus for why he wanted to be a musician and how he loves music. And I think that's true with any art. It's sort of, why does it matter to you? If you're doing it just to be famous, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And if you start buying into all your publicity, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. I have writer friends who are really famous, and they don't look at their royalty statements because they say, what does it matter? All I care about is that I make enough so that I can write another book. It's the work that matters. And once the work is out there and it's connecting to other people, most writers I know are already thinking about, well, what's the next book that I want to hurl myself into? So it's a totally different thing than what you think it is. And I really wanted both Stella and Simon to come to realize that yeah, you can reach people by what you do, but maybe it's more important just to reach one person sometimes than to reach an arena of, 100,000 screaming fans, because what is that? I mean, what is
Right.
this? I just have to tell you this story that my husband told me because it's my favorite story now. It's a friend of his got on this bus, and he was on the bus and he looked over and he said, oh, it's a New York City bus and there's Paul McCartney. And everybody's sort of like looking around like, why is Paul McCartney riding this dirty, stupid bus? And some woman in the back started shouting out, are you Paul McCartney? And he said, yes, I am. She said, can I touch you? And he said, you know what? No, you can't. And I'm not going to give anybody selfies. And I'm not going to give any, autographs, but why don't you come up here and just sit like a person and talk to me? And she got up and she sat beside him, and they had this really nice conversation about, her grandkids and his grandkids and all this other stuff. And by the time she left, both of them were changed from that brief, very non-famous interaction. And it became a memory for this guy. And I thought, that's what's real and that's what's important. You want your creative work and your writing to touch people and change them, but you don't need them to be like bowing down in front of you or any of that
Right.
stuff. That stuff isn't real. It's not real, and it's not real human connection. So that sort of totally changed everything in the best way for me.
Yeah, no, what an interesting, thread to pull. And I wanted to ask you too, because you mentioned your husband and he writes and your son is an actor. So you're all very, expressive people. So when you're all together, what is your dynamic like? Do you get creativity from each other? Are you charged?
Um,
Are you
well,
enlightened?
it well, my son is 24 now, so it's a lot. It's very different. He's very much his own person, and he's an actor, which to me is, it's something I'm so curious about because it's very different from what my husband and I do, and it's something we could never do. So I ask him a lot of questions until he tells me enough, enough, enough. He does read my books, which is great. And he did say he was surprised that it was funny, which was nice to hear. But when we get together, we sort of taught him from the time he was little that we don't care what you do as long as you love it. Like if you want to be a plumber and you love it, great. If you want to be an actor and you love it, great. And he got a lot of pushback from both his grandmothers who would say, that's not a career. That's not a career. That's a hobby. And we would always intercede and say, yeah, it can be a career. And, it would always be like, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to support yourself? And we always told him, you'll find a way.
Right.
You will find a way. I found a way to support myself on other stuff, and Jeff found a way, and you will find your way. So it was ingrained in him, and I'm really happy that he found something that he loves. And I mean, who knows? His life is changing. He's only 24. He might want to do something else, or he might stick with it, but it's his world to create, and that's what we try to impress on him.
Yeah, that's terrific. And
Never impressed on me.
I know. You've done so well. I think sometimes just proving people wrong is like the ultimate motivation. Like you're going to tell me no, I'm going to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do tell him that a creative career is like this.
Yeah.
It's not always. It's some people might have careers like this, but nobody I know. So, but you just have to you do it because you love it, and it becomes the most important thing for you, and it's great.
Right. And I was talking to somebody recently, I think it was Hank Philippi Ryan, and she was saying that, she found that in her head, I think she said she's sort of realized that she's become a method actor to inhabit her characters. And of course, they talk and they act on the page, but
Right.
it's interesting because you are assuming those personalities and
You definitely are. I know a lot of writers who take acting classes because that way you can learn how to express an emotion without having to have the character say, "Oh, I feel tired," or "I'm really angry at you." They can just do some kind of movement that's surprising. But she's absolutely right. You do inhabit them, and it's such a great job because you get to live other lives without really leaving your room.
That's right. And like you say, people are talking in your ear, like it's a good excuse. People don't look at you so strangely. um,
Yeah.
But so let me take you back a little bit. I want to ask you because you mentioned obviously it's in a creative career, it's not usually just an up and up and up trajectory. It's
No.
it's all over the place. So can you talk about when you knew that this is what your passion was and how you sort of
Yeah.
enabled yourself to follow it?
Yeah. I knew it when I was a sickly little kid. They thought I had asthma, which it turns out I never had, but they thought I had it. So I couldn't go out and play with the other kids. So I spent a lot of time in the library. And I read a whole lot of books. And the librarians were really kind to me. And I used to always say, don't you have any books about a little girl who has asthma? And they didn't, but they'd give me books about people who had tuberculosis or pleurisy. And I found that those words gave me sort of power. And when people would make fun of me and call me like asthma head, or they'd pretend to wheeze, I would tell them, you don't know anything. I have tuberculosis. And they stop and be amazed. And I wanted to write stories. And I found that when I wrote them, I wasn't that lonely little girl who was bullied. I could be anything I wanted to. And I started telling my parents, I want to be a writer. I'm going to be a writer. And at that time, my older sister wanted to be a writer too. And we would write these, we called them novels, but they were just like pads of paper. And we would write these novels together. And it was just so much fun. So I kept writing and writing. And when I got to high school, I told my English teacher I wanted to be a writer, and he said, "Excuse me, you're not that good." And I was crushed. I was absolutely crushed. And my mom was telling me, "Look, writing is a hobby. It's not a career. It's a hobby. Go be an English teacher, go to college. And I thought, okay, I'll go to college, but I still want to be a writer. And my first writing teacher in college at Brandeis was this famous at the time writer who told me, you're never going to make it. You just don't have the talent. And I thought, well, that's his opinion. I got out of college and I took all these awful, crappy jobs and I kept writing and writing. And then in my 20s, I sent a story out for publication and it won first prize. And all of a sudden I got, I was like the flavor of the month. I got reviewed and I was everywhere. I was on the radio and I thought, oh, this is great. It's always going to be this way. And it wasn't. My second book did okay, but not as well. Then my publisher went out of business. Then I got a 3-book deal with a major publisher and they weren't that interested in me. So the books didn't really sell. And then I got another big deal. And again, it was like I was sort of sinking lower and lower and lower until I got to my 9th book, Pictures of You. And it was on contract. And the editor called me up and said, I'm sorry, Caroline, we're not going to publish this. And I said, you're not? Like, why not? And she said, well, it's just not special enough for us, and which is a shocking thing to hear. And I said, well, can you help me make it more special? And there was that silence again. And she said, no, we don't really think we can. And in fact, we don't really want to publish anything of yours anymore. So I hung up the phone thinking, well, that's it. It's 9 books, no sales. Nobody knows who I am. I don't have a career. What am I going to do? So I called all my friends crying and they all said, oh, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And one of my friends said, I'm going to show the book to my editor at Algonquin. And I said, well, nothing's going to happen. They're going to look at my sales figures and say, bye. And she said, let me just try. So she gave the book to Algonquin. And the editor called me up and said, I really love this book. I want to publish it. And I said, look, I have to be really honest with you in case you don't know already. I don't sell books. I haven't made any money. And she laughed and she said, oh, you will now. Don't worry about it. So they bought the book and it was amazing. They got it into 6 printings before it was published and made the New York Times bestseller list its second week out. It was a Costco pennies pick. It made like buckets of money. And I thought, this is really weird. This is really, really strange because I had all those years and years of nothing and now there's this, and it didn't mean what the first fame meant to me anymore. All it meant to me was, it was this strange thing that was happening. And sure enough, the next book after that came out and it didn't do as well as the other one. I mean, it did okay. And it took it 6 months and then it made the New York Times bestseller list. And I began to realize, you know what? You can't know what a book is going to do.
Right.
And if that's why you're writing, then you might as well just give it up. And all I care about now is that I just want to write the best book I can. And I hope people will read it so that I can write another book. And that's my whole idea of fame now. It's sort of, the career is like, this could all end tomorrow.
Right.
I mean, it really could. Or it could get bigger. I could get a movie deal, or all of a sudden the book could not sell and then my publisher could drop me. And all of those things are sort of externals and they don't matter. What matters is, well, if that happens, what are you going to do? And I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep writing. And I'll do stupid jobs to support myself and I'll keep writing. And because that's what you do. That's what you do.
Absolutely. And I love that story. I was going to ask you about that because it's funny, so many people think that they've reached their breaking point and this is it and it's the end of the road. And then sometimes something special like that,
Something special happens.
Home for your book happens. And all of a sudden you were with the right people who are innovative and they know how to market you and they care about, like the long-term vision versus.
Right. And you never know. I mean, you never know. So much is luck. So much is really luck and timing and who you get to review you. Everyone has a different, it's so subjective. And, you can make yourself crazy thinking about that, or you can just think, oh, I get to be a writer right now. This is great. And that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I do.
Right. And I should tell people that obviously, with or without you just came out, but you also, have the kind of interesting circumstance of having a 10th edition or a 10-year edition.
Yeah,
You
yeah, this is
which just came
incredible.
out. It's
This is
beautiful.
incredible. They took this book and this was the first one I did with them. This was the not special book.
Yeah, right.
And
Right.
they gave it a new cover so it looks like this. And it's incredible. I mean, they're a wonderful supportive publisher, and it's sort of giving the book new life. And I thought, wow, that was 10 years ago, which just shows you how different things are and how you just sort of never know what's going to happen to a book. And, I'm just sort of going with the flow.
Right, right. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit because you talked about, studying writing, but you also teach. You teach online. You do critiquing, and I always find this to be an interesting topic. And I don't know if I'm opening a can of worms with it, but in your experiences and in your opinion, what of writing can be taught? What is intrinsic to the person?
Right.
And how does tenacity or discipline factor into that?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I tell all my students that I can make everyone a better writer because I can teach them structure. I cannot teach talent. The thing is that you either have it or you don't have it. But the interesting thing is that sometimes it doesn't show up right away. I have had students who were the worst ones in the class. They were really struggling. And 3 years later, they had a book out and it was critically acclaimed. And I've also had students who were like, the stars supposedly of the class, and they never published a book. They just sort of fizzled out. So you cannot tell. And I tell them it's not your job to think about that. It's your job to think about the story. And what I teach them is, I tell them just like a body, everybody has a skeleton. That's what keeps us upright and walking. And what makes us all different is the muscles you put on, the skin tone, the skin color, right down to the clothing. But you have to have that structure. And as soon as I talk about structure, a lot of my students get really anxious because they say, well, where's the creativity? Or, I'm waiting for the muse. And I tell them the muse comes after you have the skeleton. And I break it down for them in the stuff they have to have. They have to have a character who wants something. Otherwise, why are you reading this? You have to have a character who's going to change in some way, either for the better or for the worse. You have to have a character who has some kind of backstory, a ghost that's haunting them. And we go through all these structural steps, and it always happens that I do these 10-week classes, and it always happens on week 7. All of a sudden everybody's novels open up and it's incredible. It's like they realize what they're writing about and how to deepen it. And that's what I teach, and that's what I tell them. And I found that it's the only way to teach writing. And I just tell them to keep doing it, keep writing, read everything, make sure you have your structure, and get used to rewriting and to rejection. That's part of the whole career, and learn to love it. And some of my students have gone on to publish these amazing books, and I'm just so happy. And some of them I never knew that they would, but they just persevered. And definitely persistence is key. You have to realize that never ever give up. I don't care if you've had like 18 failed novels, it doesn't matter, keep going. No doesn't always mean no. You can get a response from an agent that says, I really like this, but the ending fell flat, so no. That doesn't mean no. Write back to the agent and say, if I fix the ending, will you look at it again? Most of the time they will say yes. It's persistence. You just cannot give up. You have to believe in yourself, and you will get there. You'll get there.
Sure, I love that. So my takeaway from that is you need the skeleton for your story and a thick skin for yourself.
Yes. Yes, you
So
do.
another topic for you, which you mentioned structure, and I know that you've talked in the past about how only maybe in the last decade or so you've begun to structure your stories before actually writing them. So can you talk a little bit about how
Yep.
that process has benefited you in your writing?
It's been incredible. Before I learned structure, I used to come out with literally 800-page novels, and I'd give it to my agent, and she'd say, what is this story about? And I'd say, I don't know. And we'd have to go through and chop it down, and it wasted a lot of time. So one of my students was talking about John Truby's story structure. And as soon as I heard that, I said, that's not for me. It's going to be cookie cutter, formulaic. And she said, why don't you just listen to some of the tapes and see what you think? So I started listening to John Truby, and it was amazing because he was talking about stuff I had never heard of before. Like, you know, you want your characters to have both a moral and psychological flaw, which means somehow they're hurting themselves and they don't even realize it, and they're hurting others and they don't even realize it. And I thought, this is pretty interesting. Maybe I can learn from this. So I started learning it, and I started to use it for my next book. And all of a sudden, things started to click into place for me. And I thought, oh my God, I actually have a story here. And, you know, everybody always complains about the middle. They don't know what to do in the middle. But with structure, I started to know what to do. You start off with a character who wants something, who has a misconception about it. And if you look at it, if you take a book like A Great Gatsby, you can see that structure. If you take like Nick Carraway, who changes the most actually, Nick starts out, what does he want? He wants to be rich. Why does he want to be rich? Because he's haunted by the fact that he grew up poor and he didn't fit in. What's his plan to get rich? He's going to get in with Gatsby, and he's going to get the trophy girlfriend. He's going to be one of them. And he works at it and he works at it and he finally gets it. And then what happens? Everything all falls apart. And he realizes after it falls apart that he doesn't even like these people. He's with them. He doesn't like his girlfriend. He can't stand this wealthy society. And they've ruined everyone, including Gatsby. And at the end, he realizes that what he wants is not what he needs, which is to be truly himself and to walk away from that, which is what he does. It's sort of like the Rolling Stones method of structure. You can't always get what you want, but with struggle, you get what you need. And I made up a little wants and needs Bible of those things I just talked about. And that's how I start structuring it. Like I start with the character. What do they want? What are the obstacles? Blah, blah, blah. And then I just keep going back and building on it. And it's amazing how non-formulaic and creative it really is. And once I started doing that, I thought, I'm never going to just sit there and wait for the muse, because the muse is never going to come to me anyway. So it's a really, really interesting way of working, and it's really worked beautifully for me. And I tell people that, you know, maybe it won't work for you, but maybe after you've written, maybe after you've written your whole draft, you can go back and look at your draft and see where the structural points will be there, because I guarantee they're there. They're in every single work.
Right. Right. I know, making notes to self, you know, like mental notes to self, because I'm great at starting something and then being like, well,
I'll send you the wants and needs. Let me make a note to myself. I will email you the wants and needs Bible. You'll love it.
Oh, thank you. You're so kind.
Wants and needs. Okay, I wrote the note.
Oh,
I'll do that when we're done.
A couple more questions for you, if you don't mind. So,
no, absolutely.
I'm going to pivot and switch gears again because, you know, that's what I do. But I wanted to ask you because, you know, you write, you teach, but you also review, which is sort of an interesting discipline in itself. And, you know, there are reviewers who don't write. There are reviewers who do write. And obviously, you know, you are a writer. So what do you think when you're, you know, looking at somebody else's work, critiquing somebody else's work, how are you able to draw on, you know, the emotional experiences that you've had as a writer trying to make a story work, and then, you know, write back to your feedback of how you.
Well, I became a reviewer because I was getting so crazed about, you know, my own reviews. I thought, well, I'm going to try this. And I began to realize that nobody sets out to write a bad book. And writing a book is really, really hard. And I'm never going to trash a book. And I'm lucky in that I review for people who they won't, if you don't like a book, they're not going to publish their review. And I thought, that's good, because why should you trash somebody's effort that means something to them? When I do critique something in a review, I try to be helpful. And I always make sure that the person knows that it's my opinion. Like, well, you know, why I might have preferred that it end like this. The author did this and it worked successfully. And I feel like what I'm doing is a service, and I'm telling readers what books I think they might like to read. And there's no reason to decimate anybody's career. I want to give people, ink and visibility. I don't want to make anybody feel like, nobody sets out to write a bad book. That's like always in my head. So why should some reviews are really nasty, and I don't like that. I feel like, why should you do that? And sometimes I also feel like, oh yeah, you go write a book and see how you feel about it. But no, and I like to do that. I like to promote authors. I love debuts, to discover a new author and tell people about books. It's mostly, I'm more like an excited kid. I feel like,
Right,
oh,
right.
you have to read this book, and this is why. And that's what I feel like a reviewer should do.
Right, and it's interesting that you would say that, because I wrote a guest post for something one time about reviewing and how I got involved in all that, and somebody's response was, "Well, you sound like you're more of a fan than a reviewer," and I'm like, "Well, I am a fan, because
I
why would
am
I
a fan, yeah.
do this if I
Yeah,
don't
and what's wrong with
enjoy it?"
that? What is wrong with that? I mean, it's not college where we're studying the works of somebody and like what their influences are. At least I don't think it is. I think the job of a book review is to get people interested in the book and to pull out something interesting if the author did something interesting, and not to crush their spirit.
Right. Okay, I'm going to ask you about A Mighty Blaze in just a minute, but
Okay.
first, a little bit more broadly, I want to ask you about your relationship with social media, if you don't mind, because
Oh no, not at all, not at all. I Social media saved my life. It
yeah, and I
literally
gotta
saved my
say,
life.
you're so authentic on social media. You were probably the most authentic,
Oh,
person,
thank
author,
you.
entity, really. So, can you talk a little about what is your approach to that, and what you share of yourself and how you choose to?
Well, I learned from, they want you to be on social media, and the issue is like, I seem like I'm on it much more than I am. I'm actually only on it like maybe a half hour a day, but I've learned from touring that people respond to you most when you're really open and you're really real and you say and you tell the truth. And a lot of times that truth might be mortifying to you, but it actually builds a stronger connection to people. When I first started touring on my ninth book, never had a tour before that, I found that when I talked about being bullied as a child, people really liked it. Not that they were happy that I was bullied as a
Right.
child, but they liked it that I was showing that I was vulnerable, and that I wasn't setting myself up as, the author. And I try to be that way on social media too, because I feel like, what's the point if you're going to be a persona? Like,
Right.
who cares? I mean, I try to be like really honest, and um, I like meeting people on social media. It's really exciting to, get to know different people and talk to them, and, meet. A lot of people say like, oh, you meet them on social media and then you meet them in real life, and it's not the same. But it has been the same. I mean, before the pandemic, I met a lot of people, and we'd say, oh, you live in New York, I live in New York City area. Let's meet. Let's go have coffee. And it's been great. It's like, yeah, we know each other because we were honest on social media. So I tell people, especially writers, that let yourself be vulnerable. Like, don't always talk about your book. Talk about how you tried to make an omelet and it got so screwed up you had to give it to the dog, and even the dog wouldn't touch it. And it's fun. It's fun, and there's that human connection, and I really like it. And I feel like it's very important to be honest, like about happy things and about sad things.
Right.
And um, that's what I do. And I think that social media is a great way for people to connect, and especially now in the pandemic, it's a really, really good way.
Yeah, and I actually, I remember meeting you online before we ever met in person, and I always thought, this is great, because again,
That's
coming
right.
back to how I don't like to, judge things real or not, but I always felt, she is so real, because yes, you see her successes, but you also see her struggles in real time,
Oh, yeah.
and that's terrific. But I did want to come back to, social media and the time of the pandemic too, because obviously, it's a very strange time to be launching a book. And as much as writers are, tend to be isolated, introverts in some some ways, you really realize when you can't leave the house how much, that exposure really meant to you, even if it was once a week
Right,
to get a cup of coffee. But you
right.
started this whole amazing movement with Jenna Blum. So you have a mighty blaze, which is really
Yeah.
like a trail of glory. Can you talk about that and how that?
Yeah, it's sort of, it's something I never thought was going to happen. It just, I just started the Nothing is Canceled virtual blog tour on my blog because I wanted to showcase other authors, and it blew up really quickly. And Jenna called me up and said, I really want to help. And that blew up really quickly too. And all of a sudden, one day I picked up the phone and I thought it was a spam call. And I said, yeah. And it was Ron Charles from the Washington Post. And he said, oh, I really want to talk to you about A Mighty Blaze. And we started getting more and more publicity. And it was like, Publishers Weekly, Poets and Writers, the Authors Guild. All of a sudden, there were like 200 famous authors who wanted to be author supporters. And it just has grown and grown. And it's this living thing. And I look at it and I think, wow, I mean, I've never like started a company, and I've never had a staff. And as we were talking earlier, and I told you that, there's a division of labor. I mean, my thing is that I'm sort of the heart, where I'm the person who I contact the authors and ask them, would you like to come on and be interviewed? Or would you like to interview another writer? Would you like to talk to a bookstore? And that's what I like to do. And I also answer the mail, which I like to do too. Jenna is the dynamo. She is really a genius. She's the producer. She's the one who really runs the company, and I'm happy for her to run the company. And she organizes virtual festivals, and she's always on the phone with people, and she's trying to think of, she's starting to monetize the company. And I'm very happy for her to do that. And it turns out that she's very happy for me to be getting the authors, because that's not what she likes to do. So it's worked out really, really well. And in the beginning, we were all working like 20 hours a day, just doing all this stuff, and it was just too much. And I had to make the decision to pull back a little. But now, of course, I'm touring, so I'm pulling back a little bit more. But it's a very easy thing to reach out to writers and say, it's not over. Like, why don't you come on the Blaze, and give them the instructions, or say to a writer, it would mean so much to these debut writers if you would interview them, because your name will get all the people to come on, and it will really help another. And it's great for the writers community. And only like maybe 2 people have said no.
Right.
And I won't tell you who they are.
Oh, that was my next question.
But they're kind of divas anyway,
Yeah.
so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. There's more than enough people. And some people do say no because they're just too busy,
Right.
or they're too zoomed out. But it's created this whole living, breathing, it really breathes writing community. And, Jen is so amazing. She's not only writing her new book, she's finished it, and it's a great, great memoir, but she's always thinking of new things, like we should have merchandise and sell that, and we should have like Mighty Blaze podcasts, and we should have Mighty Blaze this. And it's, I'm incredibly proud to be a co-founder of it, but I totally recognize that Jenna is running the show now, and I'm very happy for her to be doing that, and we have great people. We have fabulous Laura Rossi is like the most fabulous publicist on the planet. She's just great. And we have social media experts, and we have people who do the tech, and everybody has their own sort of niche. And it's wonderful. It's just wonderful. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a great movement. And to relate it back to the book, you take this dark circumstance like COVID, and look at the opportunities that arise from it, which is great if you're willing to, go out and embrace those. And I'm glad you mentioned Laura Rossi, because I was gonna, ask you to take a moment to extol her virtues, because she's just a Wonder Woman.
She's wonderful. She's a Wonder Woman. She's the publicist for Mighty Blaze, and she has gotten us so much stuff. And she's the one responsible for all the press. She's done it all. And she's responsible for so much press that I have gotten. Algonquin has a fabulous publicity and marketing team, and she's been working with them. And she's just, and also she's this amazing, amazing person. In fact, I've just sent one of my writer friends to her who needs a publicist, and she's thrilled to be working with Laura. So if you're a writer and you're looking for a publicist, go to Laura Rossi.
Yeah, she's
Absolutely.
great. And you just want to sit down and have a martini with her, you know?
Yes, or two or six.
Yeah, yeah, that's all right.
Especially in a pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, my last two questions for you.
Okay.
One, I want to ask you about, so you have, With or Without You out now, and also there's the 10th anniversary edition of pictures of you, and you actually are doing some really, really cool things to entice readers.
Oh, right. I forgot. That's
A little
right.
bit about the perks that they can get, because it's not often that you
Yes,
can get like a
yes.
watercolor from Caroline Leavitt or
Right, right. I'm offering a few things. If you want, if anybody who buys my book, you just have to sort of like, just go to my website, carolineleavitt.com, contact me, show me the receipt, and I will send you out these beautiful book plates and also a little watercolor I made. And if anybody buys both the books, then you get a free 3-page, double-spaced critique from me of your writing. I would be more than happy to do it. And I'll show you like what I do with structure, and you'll learn a lot. So there's no limit to the amount that I'll do. And just contact me, and I'm happy to do that. All I ask is that you buy from an independent bookstore if you can. Bookshop.org is a wonderful organization. I'll show you the independent bookstore that's near you. And if you can't, then buy from wherever you buy your books. But support reading, and I will make you a wonderful watercolor. You can choose whatever you like. I will do your favorite coffee cup, or I can do cats really well. I can do mermaids, whatever you want, I will do for you.
That is so awesome. What a cool perk. I know, I always love, if you go to one of your book signings, when there could actually be in-person book signings, you do like the best inscriptions.
Oh, I always draw. Yeah, I always draw. No, I always
I
draw.
love your coffee cups. So I'm gonna show
Yeah,
you.
I love coffee
Get
cups.
a
I love coffee.
All right, and now the question everybody loves, because you finally have this labor of love in the world, and you're doing all this wonderful stuff with A Mighty Blaze, and you're so busy that you barely sleep. But can you tease what maybe you might be working on next?
Yes, I can. Actually. One really smart thing for any writer to do is, once you've sold a book, you should immediately start on something else, because then what happens is you don't obsess about this book because you're thinking about your next book. So what I did is I used structure, and I created a synopsis for a book I wanted to write, and I wrote the first 70 pages, and I sold it, and now I have to write the damn thing. But it's based on this. It happened where I was friends with this woman, and she kept telling me about her best friend and saying, oh, you would really love her, everybody loves her, blah blah blah, on and on. And so I met this woman, and yeah, I really loved her, and she was really great. And after about 6 months, my friend said, look, I have to tell you something about her that I didn't want to tell you, but she said it's okay for me to tell you. And she said she committed a murder when she was 15, and she was in prison for 5 years, and she never tells anybody. And I thought, wow, that's what I want to write about. I want to write about somebody like that. And my friend said, well, you can't use her story. And I said, no, I'll make it totally different. So I started writing about, the book is basically it's about two adults, and they're thinking back on their past. They're not together, but when they were both 15, they were girlfriend and boyfriend, lovers. And the boy was from a very wealthy family and had a really terrible father. The girl was from a poor working class family. And the father of this boy was terrible. He was really abusive, and he was going to separate them. And they were so madly in love, they decided, well, what if we kill him? Like, they're 15 years old, and they were drinking and drugging, and they were going to poison him with a tea. And they couldn't go through with it. And they went outside, and the father drank the tea anyway. And because the boy was from a prominent family, he got off and vanished, and the girl went to prison. And and then it flashes forward where they're both adults and they can't really remember what happened that night. And she's just gotten out of prison and she's trying to figure out like what her life is. And he's sort of trying to figure out what his life is. And I don't know what happens next, but I will tell you when I find out. But it's sort of, so I had to do one of the more interesting things is I have a friend who works with women who were in prison. And part of their probation is they have to do a class about books. And she said, would you like to come and meet them? I said, like, yeah, I would, because a lot of the prisons, they won't let you in there.
Right.
So I walked into this room and there were probation officers and there were about 15 women and they're all sort of looking at me like really suspiciously. And they were very reticent to talk at first until I told them, that I can't drive, I'm a failure at driving and this and that. Then they started to loosen up a bit. And it was the most incredible conversation I ever had because the women were so honest. And I said, look, I'm writing about somebody who's coming out of prison. I just sort of want to know what it's like and I want to sort of honor your experiences. And I promise you, there's not going to be a stereotype in anything I write. One woman burst into tears, which I loved. And another woman said, I will give you my email and we will talk. And I had hours and hours of conversations with these women. And it was really incredible to me. And I came to really like them and really care about them. And they had made some real serious mistakes, but so what? They knew it. And there was a lot working against them for them to rebuild their lives. I mean, America always says, oh, we love second acts, but we don't really. We don't really. And I wanted to see what it was like for this character that I was writing, who's trying to rebuild her life. And she doesn't want anybody to know she was in prison for attempted murder because then people don't want to know you. They don't want to give you a job. They don't want to know you. There's a stigma. There's all this other stuff. And I was just really interested in that, like what you have to do to, reinvent yourself. That's my whole thing, reinvention.
Oh, I love it. That's a great hook. I'm like, man, now we have to wait for that book.
Well, you can help me write it.
Really, really slowly, but it's not possible. I mean, you just pretty much, turn themselves once you get into it. But final reminder.
Yes, please buy my book. I'll give you a watercolor. Just contact me through my website. Whatever you want, I will do. We'll work it out. I value readers and I value your time. And I know it's a pandemic and it's a wonderful thing to support bookstores and to support authors. And I want to support readers. So I want to give you a gift.
That's right. And I have to say, it is the best great escape. Everybody sort of wants to leave the world for a little bit. Why not fall into Caroline Leavitt's world? Because you will be transported. You will forget that you're living in your own world with your own problems because you will be so entranced by these people with their problems. And
thank you so much. That's really lovely. That's really lovely. This was a lovely, lovely interview, and you just asked the best questions ever.
Oh, thank you. Well, you're so
thank
generous.
You so much.
Easy. Thank you so much, Caroline, for being here. And I hope everybody picks up your book because it is bloody fabulous.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.